Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching The Global Script. I'm your host, Shafat Ali. Tonight, we begin with Pakistan, where climate change is no longer a distant threat but a reality. In northern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, flash floods triggered by relentless monsoon rains have claimed several lives. 240 people have been claimed dead, hundreds of families have been devastated, and scores have been missing. Once again, it has exposed the vulnerability of Pakistan to climate disaster. Now, according to provincial disaster management officials, swollen rivers and landslides have washed away homes, roads, bridges. Entire communities are cut off. Children are among the dead. And with more rains predicted this week, the danger is far from over. Now, this isn't just a weather story. It's a climate emergency. Pakistan contributes to less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions, and yet it ranks among the top 10 countries who are most vulnerable to the climate change, according to the Global Climate Risk Index. Now, let's not forget that just 3 years ago, in 2022, Pakistan faced catastrophic floods that submerged one-third of the country, killed more than 1,700 people, and caused an estimated $30 billion in damages. Entire villages vanished underwater. Millions were pushed into poverty. And yet again, we are seeing the same cycle of devastation repeating itself. Only this time in the rugged mountains of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Now, expert points at two different things. One is the melting glaciers at the north, which are melting at a really fast pace. Pakistan has lost more than 20% of its glacial share, which, of course, most of them have been unmapped. And the second is the erratic monsoons, because climate change is making rainfall patterns more unpredictable and more destructive. Now, the uncomfortable truth here is that Pakistan, while it's paying the human price, the world's richest polluters continue business as usual. Now, the promises of climate finance and the loss of damage funds from the international conferences remains just promises. On ground, Pakistan National Disaster Management Authority is scrambling to send tents, food and rescue teams, but the scale of the challenge is massive. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa is mountainous, remote, and already struggling with poverty and displacement from the past conflict. Now, about that, we are joined by Myra Imran Rafiq, who is PhD candidate at UNC Chapel Hill. Thank you so much, Myra, for joining in. Myra, Pakistan has contributed to less than 1% of the global carbon emissions, but yet Pakistan is at the front line of this global devastation, which is striking, attributed to the climate change. We have seen that in 2022, when one-third of the country was submerged in water, 1,700 lives were lost, and the devastation was all over the country. This year, without any warning, we have seen this happening again in the northwestern part of the Pakistan, and two major districts, Bunair and Bajor, have been struck with the most deadliest torrential downpours. Why do you think Pakistan is at the front line, and why do you think it's happening with Pakistan?
Well, thank you so much for having me, first of all. Secondly, I think it has to do more with the fact that due to Pakistan's geographical position as well. When you're talking about us, we're essentially situated in the global south. We're not part of the global north. And even though we contribute to less than 1% of carbon emissions, as we know, we are still susceptible because of the fact that we're closer to the equator. And then it's not only us, it's also our neighbors. We have India, we also China, but why Pakistan specifically has to do with the fact that, our government, and it's in essence is very ineffective. We know climate change is not a fallacy. We know climate change exists, and every single year we see these events taking place. Of course, they vary, in terms of scale, but in 2022 we saw around 33 million people displaced. We saw around 2,500 people lose their lives, and right now we're seeing a recurring pattern, and we know this is a problem if we're not doing something about it. So this is specifically on the government, be it on the federal level and even the provincial level. And this is why this exists. And the fact that Pakistan doesn't really have the facilities in order to combat climate change has just exacerbated the situation as of currently.
We have a department called IRSA. It regulates and monitors the flow of the Indus River. And they have a pattern about that. They say that Pakistan gets one dry year in every 5 years. 1 year is that completely, there's no rains at all. And 4 years are normal, but 1 year in every 5 years is also with heaviest downpours. This year alone, we are seeing more than 60 to 70% rise in the monsoon season, the monsoon downpours. This has happened before. This happened in 2020. This happened in 2022. The patterns that have absolutely changed. Is there an awareness? Do you think that Pakistani government or the private sector or the provincial governments are aware at any level of the impact of this disaster which is going to strike us every year?
Frankly speaking, no. And I say this in a very dismal way. When we have the we have the PDMA, we also have the National Disaster Management Authority, right? But then their systems, they're supposed to take note. They're supposed to have sensors. They're supposed to have climate alert centers, sensors, and whatnot in order to monitor the situation. But what happens is that okay, we get a flood warning, but that is once the situation has gone out of our hands. The climate pattern is changing and climate change is only getting worse. We saw what happened right now in KPK was not just a result of higher rainfall, it was also a result of glaciers melting. We have the Himalaya region, we have the Hindu Kush mountains, and we also have uh, we have these critical ranges over there, right? And when glaciers melt, of course, water is pivotal in that region because water flows in from that region, from those glaciers into that region. But then the overflow of water, what did we do? We don't have any dams. Yes, the government talks about building dams, but then where are the dams? Kalabag, we talk about a Kalabag, but where is the Kalabag Dam? So false promises, and the government is still again reluctant to do anything. And I don't even say it's reluctant. I think it's just procrastinating because it doesn't have the funds. Whatever we get from the IMF, it goes towards other, non-developmental necessities. We just pay off our loans. But where is the developmental aspect?
Well, that on that very point, if IMF, yeah, and you're absolutely right about it, you are spot on about that, that IMF restricts the government spending, and government is not able to spend a lot in these areas. But there comes the responsibility of the global north, as you call, that they need to contribute because they are contributing to the carbon emissions, and we are getting suffered with that. So they need to, impose or give Pakistan something in return. But we don't see any aid coming in that way.
But because of the fact that I think, there is no ownership over climate or environment or even land, right? It's free to use. You can use it to your betterment or to your detriment. So, but then this raises a question, does the global north have a responsibility every time it does something towards Pakistan? Yes, they're also trying to curb carbon emissions. They have carbon taxes. They do have EV vehicles, all that sort of stuff. But in Pakistan, I guess that system wouldn't really work. But then I think even if the global north is doing the damage, no country is ever going to own up to the damage that they're doing. Germany is one of the highest producers of CO2 emissions, but it's also actively working in order to curb them. So I think it all really just boils down to individual responsibility instead of putting it on a macro level scale, especially for a country like Pakistan, which honestly is still a developing country and still needs to, bypass a lot of hurdles in order to establish a stable international image.
In past, we have seen the government taking a little bit of interest in that. We saw the previous government had an initiative called Billion Tree Tsunami, and that was about planting a lot of trees up there in the north. But turned out that with a lot of those trees getting planted, there was a lot of deforestation and an uncontrolled industry of shingles and crush, who are just destroying and blasting mountains without any repercussions or governmental influence. Do you think does that play any part in the magnitude of the disaster which is striking in the northern Pakistan?
And yes, absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree. And I say this because even if you go to the northern areas, you go just take Murray for instance as an example. You see landslides have increased. You barely see any greenery anymore because of the fact that it's all deforested. The Lahore that I grew up in, especially as a child, is deforested. I hardly see trees anymore because all I see is real estate properties. All I see is just expansion of capitalistic interests. And I'm just going to quote them because capitalism is what's defining Pakistan. We're not thinking about a consumer. What we're thinking about is our own vested interests, and that just lies in profit maximization and profitability. So we're following a pattern of the North, but however, we're not really benefiting the consumer or our economy at the end of the day. That's the saddening thing about it. In contrast to countries such as USA or the EU region entirely, what they do is, yes, they follow a capitalistic system too, but they're able to reward their people. But what are we doing? We're just depriving them of every single right we ever could, and climate change is one of them.
We have seen that in past, the conventional rivers like Kabul and Indus used to have these magnanimous flows, and governments were pretty much prepared about them, and they used to build dams and massive infrastructures to counter that. And we have seen that the Tarbela and Mangla, they both have played their part. But do you think that with such scale of disaster which can strike anywhere, do you think that is there anything which government can do right now?
The government can certainly tag them. They can, and they can fine them, or if it comes to worse, they can also incarcerate them. But then the problem is not only with those individuals. The thing is, the problem right now is out of our hands. Even if you plant a tree right now, it's going to take 30 to 40 years for the tree to reach its height and to actually do something. So even if you plant seed saplings, it's not going to achieve anything. But what the government can do is, because we're seeing we need this because it's an urgent situation. We need to have better climate sensors. What we need are flood alerts. What we need are flood warnings. We need climate warnings. These are some of the things we don't see, especially even in the north side of Pakistan. What we do see is that once the situation has occurred, only then does the government issue warnings. Yes, it's time to evacuate. But then where do those families go to? Do you have any facilities? Do you have any flood resilient houses the government can kind of invest in? And it should, but it doesn't. So you need to really restructure your infrastructure facilities as well. You need to see what kind of materials can work, especially in those areas which are so flood prone right now. And then you also need to figure out that that's not only limited to those areas. What's happening is that people's livelihoods are getting impacted as well. So you need to maybe invest in climate resilient seeds. You do have newer technologies, maybe invest in them, because agriculture output, in my opinion, is going to be very low in the upcoming year, and that's also going to have a negative impact even on our export and import balance, because our import balance is going to rise as a result of us not even having wheat or rice in order to meet our own internal demand. So these are things that need to be taken down from the grassroots. You can't just isolate one thing and be like, we can focus on infrastructure but not agriculture, or focus on this or not that. So it needs to be a concerted effort where every authority needs to come together, regardless of it being federal or provincial. And for that, we need to understand that we are one as a country. This entire notion of segregation, that Punjabis can't interact with Sindhis, or Sindhis can't interact with Balochis, or Balochis can't interact with people from Gilgit Baltistan, has actually deepened the divide, and that is something we need to work on as one. And only then will we be able to do anything about it on a macro level, which we should have done decades ago.
Well, in past, Pakistan has done experiments like that. And we did experiments with Pakistani flora in Ayub Khan's time. When Ayub Khan wanted to populate Islamabad, he imported these plants which are not native, and now half of the Islamabad is having asthma and pollen allergies. In South, in Karachi, the then President Ayub Khan wanted a greener capital. So he imported this bush called Algaroba from Africa, and now if you go all the way till Gwadar, both sides of the roads are populated by this Algaroba, which refuses to die out, and the water table underground has been clearly destroyed. The water, you can't find water until you're 80 meters deep. 80 meters, I'm talking. We have done these experiments, and now people are a little bit reluctant about them. So do you think that we need to, rediscover our flora in order to counter these climate changes? Or do you think we should go with the conventional approach of trying to experiment new things with our flora? just so that we can put an end to these landslides which you are having in the north?
Yes, I think every element does have its downside. We even planted mangrove forests, and frankly speaking, that didn't work either. So I think we need to move beyond the orthodox and focus on the more conventional. And that is how we're going to be able to solve the problems. Maybe focus on, getting, better imported seed saplings like we've already talked about, because this is something that countries are doing and it seems to be working. But then we also have better fertilization facilities now, in order to grow agricultural crops. Then we also have orthopedic methods, so there are orthoponic methods, I'm sorry. But then there are a lot of things that we can do, but then Pakistan needs the capital investment for it. And that it will only be possible if A, we have the funds for that, and B, if we're actually willing to make it an effort. And C, then again, a lot of countries, you look at Singapore, you look at Malaysia, you look at different European countries, they have focused on improving their infrastructural facilities. If you guys know, if people know, then it's very common for the UK to not really have any ACs either. And climate change over there is becoming a problem too, right? This year was one of the hottest years even for the UK. But then they have tried, they are making efforts. It's not like they're not doing anything about it. So Pakistan really needs to up their game in every segment.
Thank you so much, Myra, for joining in. It's really insightful, and we will keep having you again on our show. Thank you so much. Time for a quick break. Stay tuned to the Global Script. You're watching Ocean News. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Global Script. I'm your host, Shafat Ali. Before going on the break, we were talking about the climate crisis and how Pakistan is the most vulnerable region in this climate change. Well, joining me now is Mustafa Tariq Vai, who is a columnist, an article writer, and also a climate activist. So thank you so much for joining in on the Global Script. Mustafa Saab, without much ado, I'm going to straight go to the question. Whatever is happening in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and in the Himalayan foothills, is this a man-made disaster, or does nature also plays its part in it?
So thank you first of all for having me to your show. It's a multifaceted issue. One is our local shortcomings, and second is the global perspective. So globally, if I explain why this has happened, according to a World Bank report, Pakistan has already exceeded the 1 degree Celsius temperature mark since the 1950s. So when we have higher temperatures, there's more moisture up in the air. If there's more moisture up in the air, the downpour is going to be equally strong. We've seen heat waves hit KP, parts of KP temperatures far exceeding the 45 degrees Celsius mark. Uh, Add that up with the rising temperatures as well, with that exacerbates the process of glacial lake outbursts. One. Two, climate models have indicated time and again how the South Asian monsoon is becoming more erratic as the years go by. So add all of this up with rising temperatures, and that lead to erratic rainfall, that leads to glacier outbursts. Pakistan has already lost over 20% of its glaciers, and mind you, most of Pakistan's glaciers are not even mapped. So when you add the entire thing up, we have a disaster on our hands, which just took place a few days back.
Mustafa Saab, this whole thing, it's been attributed to this massive deforestation, this unregulated timber smuggling which has been going on in the KP, and also the crush industry, which has been extracting crush and shingles for the roads and housing industry. It's been unregulated as well. There have been people, sitting politicians, who have been running that in a manner of cartel. Do you think that has attributed to the disaster?
You're absolutely right. Pakistan does not have an urban policy. We do not have city policies. That's the number one reason why we have so much of this crushing mafia and this timber mafia operating inside Pakistan. So, with regards to tree, our reforestation efforts do not match our deforestation efforts. Deforestation by a poll take a toll on Pakistan's reforestation efforts. If we're going to cut down on trees, which give you a natural protection against floods, what do you expect if not a flash flood wiping out the entire city? You see, so we need more regulation in place. We need more oversight, and this isn't going to take place if we're going to just let the bureaucracy deal with this. Climate fight can only take place when we have empowered communities, and empowered communities can only take place when we have empowered local governments. Local representatives know the local nature-based solutions better than any expert or any bureaucrat that's sitting in power.
That's quite generous of you to attribute it to the lack of local governance, but it's just not local governments. It's because this whole smuggling thing has been going out like a parallel industry. They are a parallel economy. They have been. We have seen that when the floods came, there were boulders coming in on houses in Bajor alone that weighed more than 40 tons. So definitely this deforestation efforts, as claimed by the government that they are trying to, I'm talking about specifically about the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa government, they have been claiming that they are trying their best to repopulate and reforest these natural habitats of the trees. Do you think their claims are right about that?
I think efforts are being done, but there isn't just, you see, the kind of money that is needed for climate adaptation, it isn't there. Even if you look at the global financial model when it comes to climate change, money is there when you can on bankable projects. For example, you want to start an EV plant, you will have money for that. You want a renewable plant, you will have money for that. But when it comes to adaptation, making climate resilient infrastructure, making climate resilient schools, waterways, things like that, you cannot bank them. For example, if you want to make a flood wall on a river path, how is that bankable? So the entire financial model is flawed, backed by the government's lack of efforts. You see, and moreover, government also exacerbates the human greed. You see, not everything that the nature has to offer is for human consumption. We have riverview housing societies, riverfront housing societies, hillview resort. Not everything is made to profit upon. You see, unless and until we let nature take its path, disasters like this are going to take place.
Mustafa Saab, you're absolutely right. We need to give nature its due path. But there is something unusual going on, and it's not just confined to the hilly areas. Like you just said, that have these housing societies, this whole mafia who's taking over the river lands and who are trying to build the infrastructure just to get more money. We have seen that in just recent past, these unconventional rivers, right, like Panchkoda in Dir and Bajor, we have seen this Panchkoda river never crossing beyond 50,000 cusics. The Panchkoda recorded at 125,000 cusics. We have seen Darya Sawat at a pace and torrent which have never been witnessed before. The entire villages have been swept. Do you think that it's just about encroaching the riverbeds, or actually climate is asking us to stay away from the riverbeds?
So it's one and the same thing you've rightly pointed out. You see, the river never forgets its path. Even if the river is not there for 25 years, one day it will regain its path and reconquer its territory. So, with regards to regulation that we previously talked about, we need better zonings, and better zonings backed by poverty elevation plans. You see, people living on the riverbed, I'm just talking about families living on the riverbeds. They are forced to live there because of poverty. Poverty forces them to make their lifestyle, their life choices in such a manner. With regards to having resorts over there, that's literally how the government has failed to protect its people and allowed this to happen in the first place. You're absolutely right. We need better zoning of our areas, and it's long overdue. Pakistan needs an urban policy that is modern in nature and not stuck in the 1960s, backed by the American urbanization policy, where we have highways, we have urban housing expansions. You tell me, if there is no green area left, if we keep on pouring asphalt on the roads, how exactly is the water going to soak in? So we have urban flooding in the cities, and more importantly, world over, do we see is that the cities are at the forefront of the climate crisis. Cities contribute the most amount of carbon emissions globally. So we have mayors as part of the C40 platform coming together, making plans, and to fight the climate battle. Whereas in Pakistan, half the country does not even have local governments, and the provinces that do not have empowered mayors. Even in Islamabad, the city planning is with the bureaucrats, not with the elected government. Pakistan, Islamabad does not have a local government since 2015, last time the elections took place. So unless and of course we decentralize this, because the climate fight is all about empowering the communities. You cannot empower communities sitting at the federal level, sitting at the provincial headquarters, because we need to go right to the smallest administrative unit to fight out this battle.
We need to actually go to the core of the problem, and many people in those areas, in these areas which have been struck the most by this disaster, they have been attributing this whole disaster to the tourism industry, and they have been saying it time and again that these hotels are way too powerful. They encroach the riverbeds, and that's why the river is just taking its due course. And since there are these hotels, the river has to detour and it goes into the civil areas. Would you agree with that?
I totally endorse this view. You see, our tourism industry is unregulated. Anyone can open a resort. People are going to the most vulnerable parts of the country. For example, people take their jeeps to the Deosai Plains, the highest point, where the oxygen levels are very low. We've already seen species going extinct in that area. So we really need to come up with a tourism policy that is very eco-friendly. And two things: profiteering and protecting the environment cannot coexist. There is no such thing globally. You see, we have a perfect example of Bhutan. Bhutan has come up with a plan where they allow a certain amount of tourists to go to their tourist places to a certain period of time. They don't let unflow of unaccounted amount of tourists going into their tourist spot, because they want to protect their nature. Similarly, up in the north, we need to be very cautious of our conservation efforts, because if this keeps on happening, because this is just the start. We need to understand this was the coldest summer we're going to experience in our lifetime. It's only going to get worse from here unless we put some brakes on it.
Thank you so much, Mustafa, for joining in and for being extremely insightful. Thank you so much. That's all from the Global Script. Ladies and gentlemen, keep watching Ocean News.